Picture this. You've just landed in Australia. You're excited. The weather is beautiful, the roads are wide and clean, and you've got a brand new rental car sitting in the airport car park waiting to take you on the adventure of a lifetime. You feel confident. You've been driving for years. You know what you're doing. And within the first 30 minutes, before you've even reached your hotel, you've broken 3 Australian driving laws without realizing it. No flashing lights, no police officer, just a camera somewhere, an algorithm processing your plates, and a fine that's going to arrive in your inbox before your holiday is even over. This happens thousands of times every single year in Australia. And the people it happens to are not reckless. They are not irresponsible. They are ordinary, careful travelers who simply didn't know what they didn't know. And that gap between what tourists assume about Australian roads and what Australian law actually requires is exactly what this video is going to close completely. Stay with me until the very end, because I'm going to walk you through all 10 of the most commonly broken Australian driving rules by tourists, why each one exists, what the real consequences are, and exactly what you need to do to make sure your time on Australian roads is memorable for all the right reasons. This is AU Driving Insider, and this might be the most practically valuable driving video you ever watch before visiting Australia. Let's go! There is something about arriving in a new country that creates a dangerous kind of overconfidence behind the wheel. You've driven in other countries before. You figured it out. How different can Australia really be? The answer, as thousands of tourists discover every year to their significant financial cost, is very different. In ways that are subtle, specific, and completely non-obvious unless someone tells you in advance. Australia's road rules have evolved from a unique combination of British colonial heritage, local geographic realities, and decades of road safety research that has produced some of the most detailed and strictly enforced traffic legislation in the world. The country takes road safety seriously, not as a slogan, but as a genuine policy priority backed by real enforcement infrastructure. And that enforcement infrastructure does not distinguish between locals and visitors. The cameras don't care where your passport is from. The fine arrives either way. So let's start at the very beginning, with the rule that sounds so obvious that it barely seems worth mentioning, but which is responsible for a significant number of tourist accidents in Australia every single year. Drive on the left. That's rule number 1. And before you think, yes, I know, I researched this before coming, let me tell you something that the research doesn't fully capture. Knowing intellectually that Australia drives on the left is very different from the automatic, instinctive reality of actually doing it when you're tired from a long flight, navigating an unfamiliar city, and making split-second decisions at intersections. Your brain has years, possibly decades, of muscle memory telling it exactly what to do behind the wheel. And that muscle memory was built on whichever side of the road your home country uses. In moments of stress, distraction, or fatigue, that muscle memory takes over. It happens below conscious thought. And in a country where the traffic comes from the opposite direction to what your instincts expect, the consequences can be catastrophic. The data consistently shows that tourist accident risk is highest in the first 24 to 48 hours of driving in Australia. The most dangerous moments are pulling out of a car park, navigating a roundabout, and driving on quiet rural roads where there's no other traffic to unconsciously follow as a directional cue. Give yourself extra time. Drive slower than feels necessary. Put a reminder on your dashboard if that helps. And if at any point you feel disoriented, pull over safely, take a breath, reorient yourself, and then continue. No destination is worth the alternative. Rule number 2 is one that generates enormous confusion among tourists from North America, continental Europe, and large parts of Asia. And it involves what happens at an intersection that has no signs at all. In Australia, at an unmarked intersection, meaning no traffic lights, no stop sign, no give way sign, no painted lines, you must give way to any vehicle approaching from your right. It doesn't matter if you think you arrived first. It doesn't matter if you're traveling faster or on a wider road. If a vehicle is approaching from your right at an unmarked intersection, you stop and you let them go. This is the law in every Australian state and territory without exception. This rule exists because Australia needed a universal default for the enormous number of intersections across the country, particularly in suburban and regional areas, that simply aren't marked with signs. And give way to the right was the standard that was chosen and codified. But for tourists coming from countries where right-of-way at unmarked intersections follows different logic, or from countries where such intersections barely exist, encountering this rule for the first time at speed is deeply disorienting. Failing to give way at an intersection carries a real fine and real demerit points in every state. But more importantly, intersection crashes are among the most physically dangerous types of collisions because of the angles and speeds involved. Before you drive in Australia, spend 5 minutes making this rule completely automatic in your mind. At every unmarked intersection, look right, give way if something is coming, then proceed. Make it a habit before it matters. Rule number 3 is something that locals take completely for granted, but which tourists from many countries find genuinely surprising. And that's the keep left rule on multi-lane roads. In Australia, on any road with a speed limit of 80 kilometers per hour or above and 2 or more lanes traveling in the same direction, you are legally required to drive in the left lane unless you are overtaking. The right lane is for overtaking only, not for sitting in because it feels faster, not for cruising at the speed limit when the left lane is empty, not for staying in because your exit is coming up in 15 kilometers. Overtaking only, and then back to the left. Many tourists, particularly those from countries where driving in the right lane or fast lane is simply cultural practice rather than illegal, bring this habit to Australian highways without even thinking about it. And they quickly find that Australian drivers communicate their displeasure with right lane sitters quite directly, through flashing lights, through close following, and through behavior that actually creates road safety risks. Beyond the social friction, police do actively enforce this rule, and the fine is real. The practical adjustment is simple. Get on the highway, move to the left lane, stay there, and only move right when you need to overtake someone. Then move back left. It takes a few trips to make it feel natural if you're not used to it. But once it clicks, it's actually a cleaner and more efficient way to use a highway. AU Driving Insider covers this rule regularly because it's one of the most consistently misunderstood aspects of Australian road behavior for international visitors. Rule number 4 might be the single rule that generates the most tourist confusion in Australian cities, and it involves roundabouts. Specifically, how to indicate correctly when navigating them. Australia has very specific and legally required indicating rules for roundabouts. If you're turning left, taking the first exit, you indicate left before entering the roundabout. If you're going straight through, taking what would typically be the second exit, you don't indicate on entry, but you indicate left as you approach and take your exit. If you're turning right or doing a U-turn, taking a later exit on the right side, you indicate right on entry, travel around to your exit, and then indicate left as you leave. The reason this matters is that roundabouts in Australia are busy, multi-user environments shared with cyclists, pedestrians, and drivers approaching from multiple directions simultaneously. Your indicators are the primary communication tool telling everyone else what you're about to do. Getting it wrong doesn't just risk a fine for improper indicating. It creates genuine collision risk because other road users are making decisions based on signals you're sending incorrectly. Take the time before your trip to watch a video specifically on Australian roundabout rules. There are many available online, and the visual demonstration makes it much clearer than any written explanation. 5 minutes of preparation on this specific topic could prevent a very unpleasant and potentially dangerous experience in the middle of a busy Australian city. Number 5 is something that stops tourists in their tracks, sometimes literally, when they first encounter it. And that's the absolute priority that pedestrians hold at zebra crossings in Australia. A zebra crossing is a crossing marked with alternating black and white stripes painted on the road surface. You'll find them near schools, in shopping precincts, in suburban areas, and in city centers. And in Australia, the rule at these crossings is not a suggestion, it is an absolute legal requirement. If a pedestrian is on the crossing, or if a pedestrian is clearly waiting at the crossing and has begun to step onto the road, you must stop, completely. And you must remain stopped until that pedestrian has fully cleared your path. In many countries, pedestrian crossings operate on a more informal, negotiated basis. Pedestrians wait for a gap in traffic. Drivers slow, but don't necessarily stop if they judge they can pass safely. This approach is completely unacceptable in Australia and actively enforced. AI camera systems in many Australian cities are now specifically calibrated to detect vehicles that fail to give way at pedestrian crossings. The fine is substantial, The demerit points are real, and the moral dimension, that a pedestrian trusted the crossing to protect them and a driver let them down, is something that stays with people. Beyond zebra crossings, school zones deserve their own moment of attention. The reduced speed limits that apply around schools, typically 40 kilometers per hour in zones that are normally 60, are among the most consistently and unforgivingly enforced limits in Australia. Missing a school zone sign because you're unfamiliar with the area does not constitute a legal defense. The cameras in school zones do not offer warnings. They issue fines. Know what a school zone sign looks like in Australia before you drive, and when you see one, slow down immediately and completely. Let's pause here, and I want to ask you something directly. If you're planning a trip to Australia, or if you know someone who is this information actually getting through? Because the difference between knowing these rules and not knowing them is often the difference between a wonderful holiday and one that costs you thousands of dollars and ends with complications that follow you home. Subscribe to AU Driving Insider right now if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell and share this video with anyone you know who's heading to Australia. We are only halfway through, and the rules still to come include some of the most financially consequential ones on the entire list. Rule number 6 involves alcohol. And this is where international visitors who consider themselves responsible, moderate drinkers, get caught completely off guard. The general blood alcohol limit in Australia for full license holders is 0.05. Most tourists have heard this figure. What most tourists have not heard is that this limit does not apply to them. In the majority of Australian states, drivers operating on international licenses are subject to a 0 blood alcohol limit. 0, not 0.05. Not a glass of wine with dinner, and you're probably fine. 0 detectable alcohol. Any amount puts you in violation. The reasons for this are practical. Authorities cannot verify the licensing history, experience level, or training standard of international license holders. The zero tolerance position removes ambiguity and maximizes safety in situations where verification is impossible. The logic is sound. But the practical impact on tourists who are used to a glass of wine with their restaurant meal and then driving back to their accommodation without ever considering themselves impaired is significant. Australian drink driving penalties are serious. Fines measured in thousands of dollars. Immediate suspension. Possible criminal charges for higher readings. Vehicle impoundment in serious cases. And critically, your travel insurance policy almost certainly contains a clause voiding coverage for any incident that occurs while you are driving under the influence. A single drink driving incident on an Australian road could expose you to financial liability that dwarfs the cost of your entire trip. The rule for international visitors is non-negotiable and completely unambiguous. If you are driving, you do not drink. Not a little. Not one drink. Not something that you'd be fine with at home. 0. Call a taxi, use a rideshare, or designate a driver who isn't drinking. This is the only position that is both legally safe and practically wise. Rule number 7 is the mobile phone rule, and Australia's version of this rule is more comprehensive and more strictly enforced than almost anything tourists are used to from their home countries. In Australia, you cannot hold your phone while driving. You cannot have it in your lap. You cannot use it on speaker while holding it in your hand. You cannot check a notification at a red light. You cannot look at your map while stopped in traffic. You cannot touch your phone in any way while the vehicle is not properly parked with the engine off. The only legal way to interact with your phone while driving is through a properly installed hands-free mounting system. And even then, certain interactions may be restricted depending on your license type. AI-powered cameras are actively detecting phone use inside vehicles across Australian cities and highways. These cameras can identify the physical posture associated with phone interaction, the downward head angle, the positioning of the hands, the direction of the eyes, even at highway speeds and through car windows. Infringement notices are generated automatically. The fine arrives without any police interaction whatsoever. For tourists in rental cars who haven't set up navigation before leaving the car park, the temptation to just quickly glance at the phone to check directions is enormous. Resist it completely. Set up your navigation before you start driving. Connect to the car's Bluetooth system before you leave. And put the phone in the glove box or center console where you physically cannot reach it while moving. The fine for a single phone offense in Australia can run to several $100s. It is not worth it. Rule number 8 is one that catches tourists in cities with particular frequency, and it involves the specific rules around where you can and cannot stop or park in relation to certain fixed points in the road environment. Australia requires vehicles to not stop within 10 meters of an intersecting road at an intersection without traffic lights, within 1 meter of a fire hydrant, in a manner that obstructs a driveway, even partially, in a bus zone, taxi zone, or loading zone during the relevant hours. These rules exist across all Australian states, and the distances and locations specified are non-negotiable. In Australian cities, parking enforcement officers are active and consistent. Rental cars are easy to identify, and the administration process for passing fines through to the renter is straightforward and efficient, meaning that even tourists who are only in a location briefly will receive their fine through the rental company, along with an administration fee that adds to the total cost. Attempting to contest these fines from overseas after returning home is both difficult and rarely successful. Before stopping anywhere in an Australian city outside of a clearly marked and paid parking facility, take 30 seconds to genuinely assess your surroundings. Is there an intersection nearby? A hydrant? A driveway? A zone marking with hours that apply right now? These checks are quick and they are worth doing every single time. Rule number 9 affects tourists who are drawn to what is genuinely one of the most spectacular driving experiences on Earth, Australia's outback and remote road network. And it is a rule that carries consequences far more serious than any fine. Most standard rental car agreements specifically prohibit driving on unsealed roads. Unsealed meaning dirt roads, gravel tracks, remote outback routes, the kinds of roads that lead to the most breathtaking and remote landscapes in the country. If you drive a standard rental vehicle on an unsealed road and anything goes wrong, a puncture, a mechanical failure, an accident, your rental insurance is void. The full cost of vehicle recovery, repairs, and any liability falls entirely on you as an individual. Recovery from a remote location in outback Australia can cost tens of thousands of dollars. Beyond the financial risk, remote driving in Australia carries genuine survival risks that are completely unlike anything most tourists have encountered. Distances between petrol stations can exceed 300 kilometers on some outback routes. Mobile phone coverage disappears entirely across vast stretches of the interior. Summer temperatures can reach levels that are life-threatening in a broken-down vehicle without adequate water. People die on Australian outback roads because they underestimated these risks. It happens with terrible regularity. If your Australian adventure includes remote road driving, and it genuinely should, because the landscapes are beyond extraordinary, hire a vehicle that is actually rated for that terrain. Read your rental agreement completely before signing. Carry far more water than you think you need. Tell someone responsible your planned route and expected check-in times, and do not deviate from that plan without communicating the change. The outback is magnificent. It is also unforgiving of unpreparedness. And that brings us to rule number 10, the final rule, and in many ways the most universally applicable one on this entire list. Speed limits in Australia are lower than what many international visitors expect, and they are enforced with a consistency and technological sophistication that surprises people accustomed to more relaxed enforcement in their home countries. The default urban speed limit is 50 kilometers per hour. Residential streets near schools and pedestrian areas often have limits of 40 or 30. The open road limit is typically 100 kilometers per hour. These limits are posted on signs that tourists sometimes miss because they're unfamiliar with what Australian road signs look like. And missing a speed limit sign does not constitute a legal defense. What makes this especially significant for tourists is the rental car fine process. Speed fines in Australia are issued to the registered vehicle. In a rental car, that means the fine goes to the rental company, who pass it on to you along with an administration fee. And with the expansion of bilateral traffic infringement data sharing agreements between Australia and an increasing number of countries, fines that tourists assume they've left behind when they boarded their flight home have a way of resurfacing through their home country's licensing system months or even years later. Set your navigation system to alert you to speed limit changes. Watch road signs carefully, especially when transitioning from open road to town or suburb, where limits change quickly and cameras are often positioned immediately after the transition. And accept that Australian limits, while they may feel conservative, are what they are, consistently enforced, non-negotiable, and accompanied by consequences that follow you across international borders. 10 rules. 10 ways that tourists unintentionally break Australian law on the road every single day. And now, because you stayed until the end of this video, you know every single one of them. You know why they exist. You know what the consequences are. And you know exactly what to do to make sure none of them apply to you. That knowledge is genuinely valuable. It could save you hundreds of dollars in fines. It could save your rental car insurance. It could keep your travel insurance valid. And in the case of the rules around alcohol, remote driving, and road positioning, it could genuinely protect your safety and the safety of the people around you. If this video helped you, please hit the like button right now. It makes a real difference to how many other tourists find this information before they need it rather than after. Share this video with anyone you know who is planning to visit Australia and drive while they're here. They need to see this. Leave a comment below and tell me, where are you traveling from? And which of these 10 rules surprised you the most? I read every single comment personally, and I want to know what caught you off guard. And if you are not yet part of the AU Driving Insider community, subscribe right now. Hit that bell. Turn on all notifications. Because this channel is dedicated to making sure that everyone who drives on Australian roads, local or visitor, new arrival or long-term resident, has access to the most accurate and most useful Australian driving information available anywhere. Drive smart, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one.